topics in my head that I wanted to talk about out loud, because and speaking sort of helps me organize my thoughts and find more clarity in verbal expression, than mental. When I'm thinking about something, it's more of it's a different set of tools essentially that I'm using to sort of find the various components inside of myself and examine them. So one of the things that I was sort of musing over was emotions. I think emotions are very interesting, because I don't think I think we're still really like the language that we use to describe much of what we experience as humans is very veiled. Like when we describe things, we assume that we know what we mean and what another person means when they're discussing a subject. But I don't think we've reached a point as a culture that where we've really fully pierced the veil of what it means to be human, and have gone on, sort of reached a state where we feel comfortable enough about what it is that we are, that we can openly really talk about what the components are that sort of determine how we behave and why we behave in certain ways. And so there's a lot of mechanics that work in the shadows, even within psychology. I think most psychologists are not particularly talented in the area which they've chose to study, because they sort of take, once you establish a sort of a discipline, an academic discipline, the student is naive and he doesn't really understand that this is all, doesn't understand like everything that we know about human beings. It comes from human beings, came from human beings that were like like naive, stupid, arrogant, wanting to make a mark on the world. So there's a lot of that. I think there's a lot of hubris in the field of psychology, because we all sort of people have different motives for studying the things that they study, and one of them is we want to verify our own biases. And so like often what we see is in the field of psychology is we see the psychologists focus to the areas that are of interest to them because of their own personal sort of psychology. And so what we see is sort of a mirror of what the lens is through which they are viewing humanity, without really having peeled back all the layers of the onion to really look, well, what is even motivating me to do that? Why do I see it that way? Why is it that my focus is on this subject and and I paint it in this light. Are there things that I'm taking for granted here? Are there are there things that I've decided are fundamental that are not fundamental? How well is it that I really understand the topic? Or is my whole structure that I've built, is it on a foundation where there's some assumption that has been made that is actually a variable, not a concrete, immovable, fact? And so, I think young psychology students, they go into this field with the expectation that, this is the truth. There are certain things that we understand, and we, believe, we trust that there's the scientific method will, solve for human, it will balance out human interference with, the subject matter. But, I think psychology is kind of it's a difficult thing to study ourselves, objectively. Inherently, when the object and the subject are sort of the same, one's own motives are going to invariably color the outcome of whatever conclusion is made. And wherever we are interested is going to be paint a certain picture that may exclude a more holistic point of view. And so, in all of this, what I'm talking about, I started, off with this, what I'm interested in. One of the things that have been floating around my head was, emotions. And, how do we label what an emotion is? We sort of think of emotions as, we have a set of emotions that are familiar to us, that are commonly used to describe the various, feeling states that we find ourselves in. But, we often behave as though we are subject to our emotions, and that our emotions are like gods that function within us, over which we have little influence or agency. But, my sort of deduction from having studied my own emotions and, various other things that I've been exposed to, seems to, the realization has come to me, from my point of view, it's very clear that emotions are much like language. Language is different in every culture, depending on what part of the world you grow up in, you learn a certain kind of language. And there's, within that language are certain things that describe, various articles of the world. And emotions are much like language. They are very highly dependent on culture and the rules of that culture, and how do we express those emotions. What is the what are the etiquettes around the emotion? How do we resolve the emotion? Because emotions are kind of like, they're not merely a reaction to the world and to our environment. Emotions are, I believe, their primary function is a motivating tool. So whatever emotion we have, it serves a purpose within the context of our culture to achieve a certain goal. And so, a lot of mental illnesses are defined by things that we consider an excess of negative emotions, that we've associated with negative emotions. And, we prescribe, medications to help people have, better emotional regulation. But I think, that aside, well, let's look at that for a second. It's like, we sort of take for granted that, within that realm of psychiatry, of prescribing medicine to solve, emotional problems, we sort of we bulldoze over the fundamental, the fundamental truth behind, why those are, those emotional states exist. And we view them as problematic rather than intentional states that serve a purpose in order to achieve a goal. And you're going to have a hard time getting someone to release their clutches on an emotion if they feel that their goal has not been reached. So people often hold an emotion as a tool to get them closer or further away from, either something that they desire, so they hold on to it so that they can achieve the desired outcome, or to avoid a certain outcome. And so my criticism is of the going the medication route is that, you're sort of trying to bypass this whole dynamic of, realizing that emotions are inherently negative. There's no, sadness is not a negative emotion. It's more strategic than we like to think. It serves a purpose. And so if we start from the premise is that we don't have any control over our emotions, and that they don't really serve a purpose other than that we're subject, peasants are to the lords, that's, first of all, that's a self-defeating state of weakness, that we sort of capitulate to that. And it serves drug companies that want to profiteer off of the suffering of mankind to reinforce this idea that we have no control over certain emotions. And perhaps, I don't know, that might be true, but I don't think, and it could be true that we have maneuvered ourselves so effectively into a state that it's going to be very difficult to let the clutches go without medical aid. And certainly there's always room for remedies and such to improve our lives. I'm not against medication or remedies, but it's it's sort of if we it's sort of the ignoring the truth that emotions serve a purpose, and we are part of what decides what that purpose is, and we learn our emotions and how we express them and how we experience them largely is a cultural phenomenon. The way I sort of looked at it, the other days, I was thinking about babies, and I was thinking about, what can be said about a baby, Can it be said for a fact that, when a baby is crying, is it, sad? No, it's not crying because it's sad. It's crying to achieve a purpose, It's crying, it's getting attention, and there's no, it's not really suffering. The crying is merely like the body flowing and then creating, a physical reaction within, the baby is using a physical reaction to express a certain kind of stimulus within itself, like, maybe hunger, or maybe it wants attention, or, and, it doesn't even know what exactly it wants. It just knows that there's a certain sensation in the body, and that it needs relief, and that the baby sort of, needs to make some kind of sound in order to achieve a certain, purpose. But there is no real purpose for the baby. The baby is merely doing what it feels naturally to do. And then, we sort of project onto the baby, well, the baby has a purpose, the baby wants attention, or the baby may receive attention, and the attention may soothe the baby, but the baby has no real concept of that. It just happens to work out favorably to the baby in order to achieve a certain emotional self-regulation, by doing what comes naturally. And then, the environment, if it's, if it's favorable to the baby, it sort of reinforces the baby in that, that expression is like a positive thing. And so, you can't, can I say that, when a baby cries, is it sad? No, not really. I don't think so. Or can I say that a baby is angry when it's crying? No, I don't think you can say that it's angry. All I can say about the baby is that it's expressing a certain, in a certain way in response to some kind of internal stimulus, and then it finds its regulation within itself to express in a certain way, which appears to be goal-oriented, but it doesn't really become goal-oriented until the baby sort of forms an ego, and the ego then decides, oh, I am the baby, I want these things, and this has worked in the past, and now I expect it to work in the future. And then, then is when it starts to decide, oh, I'm happy, I'm sad. But it's more of like a decision at that point in order to achieve a certain goal. So I would be very reluctant to say that babies are inherently born with, the set of emotions that we commonly use to describe our own emotional states. I wouldn't say you could say that a baby is angry, sad, depressed, greedy, or jealous. You could see things that may appear like some of these things on the surface, but what is the baby actually, how is it experiencing it? It's just experiencing a natural sort of flow of current in its environment. And so what emotions are, as we become adults, are much more about, they're not just like the sheer experience, it's also the evaluation of how we believe society views that experience. So it's a commentary on top of a certain stimulus within our own body. And so like we commentate on like, well, this experience is associated with sadness, so we decide it's sadness, but is it really sadness? When we go to the feeling itself and we fully like experience it, well, what happens? Quite frequently, when you really learn to coexist with your feelings, some transformation happens, with them. And this is, why meditation is a valuable tool for emotional regulation, is partly because you become unbiased in your evaluation of what you're experiencing, and you don't no longer view it as a positive or a negative state. And it's like sometimes we may find ourselves in a state of like, when will I be happy again? Or as soon as we become happy, we fear like, oh shit, like how long is this gonna last? When will my happiness be over? I'm afraid it's gonna be over too soon. But sort of like when we learn how to be with whatever it is that we experience without like labeling it as positive or negative, and simply as a sort of a reflection of our own being, and we sort of love it, learn to be with that emotion in a loving way. And what is love? Love is like a lack of judgment. It is simply like being in the proximity of something and saying that it's okay, essentially. So anyway, how that was one of the things that I sort of wanted to talk about. But I'm sort of in a meandering sort of mood, and I've got all these sort of a bit of a backlog of things that have been on my mind. So I'll leave this one here for now, but there's more stuff that I wanted to talk about, so I'll probably make another video for that. Anyhow, I'll leave it here.